Yay!
I recently did a video on the Game Boy Color game Yu-Gi-Oh! Dark Duel Stories. Since I'm dead set on covering every single Yu-Gi-Oh! Game that I ended up playing as I grew up before the inevitable heat death of the universe. And given that these sacred cards has a very similar gameplay to that of Dark Duel Stories, I figured that this would be a good follow-up sequel type thing to that video. Released in the United States in November of 2003, as well as over a year prior in Japan on July 4th, 2002, its actual original name is Duel Monsters 7: The Duel City Legend. That's Duel City without a space, for some reason. I mean, hey, you can make up words however you like. I won't stop you. I don't even think that's possible. Viewers of my Dark Duel Stories video will remember that that game's name was originally Duel Monsters 3: Tri-Holy God Advent. So you'll notice that we've skipped a couple games in the series to get to this point, as well as a few other games in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Brand as a whole. I'll get back to the others in due time, I pinky promise. So let's talk about what makes these sacred cards so special. First off, as with most Yu-Gi-Oh! Games and also some bathing products for some reason, we have some promotional cards to look at. The US version of the sacred cards comes with prismatic secret rares of the Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth, Ryukyu, and Negate Attack. Japan's promotional cards go kinda hard here, since they received secret rares of a 5-headed dragon, Visor Dez, a Dragon Master Knight, and Spell Shattering Arrow. I'm not exactly sure why they got 4 cards instead of 3. The wiki simply mentions that the 5-headed dragon promo was only released as a limited card, whatever that means. So perhaps it was given out as a pre-order bonus of some sort? I'm not entirely sure. And feel free to inform me if you happen to know the answer to that question. But the Japanese promos don't stop there. There were 2 entirely separate game guides released with a single promotional card within each. The first being an ultra rare copy of Spell of Pain. I've literally never seen this card in my life. What is this? And the second being an ultra rare copy of Puppet Master. Brush your teeth, man, come on. Unlike the standardized gameplay format of Yu-Gi-Oh! Games like Dark Duel Stories or the Eternal Duelist Soul that forego any sort of story elements in favor of duelist gauntlets, Yu-Gi-Oh! The Sacred Cards is primarily a narrative-focused game. From the box art itself, I'm sure you've already gathered what kind of story we're in for. Yu-Gi-Oh! The Sacred Cards follows a heavily edited retelling of the events that take place during the Battle City arc of the manga and anime, with the caveat that the character that you play as is basically a stand-in for the player themselves. What I'm actually trying to say is, Yu-Gi-Oh! The Secret Cards is basically self-insert Yu-Gi-Oh! Fanfiction, and it's not even good fanfiction at that. If you wanted the bare minimum Cliff Notes version of what happened during the Battle City arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! Story, then the Sacred Cards still isn't the game for you because nothing that happens in this game is actually what happens in the story. Almost every single important duel that would have had relevant Yu-Gi-Oh! Characters involved are now forced to include a silent protagonist that gets to hog all of the glory for themselves. It's actually quite baffling given that the box art does not include the main character of the game at all, especially since he's supposed to be Yugi and Joey's like best friend. And I'm left wondering why we simply don't play as Yugi themselves, since that's how things work in Forbidden Memories, the Falsebound Kingdom, and Capsule Monster Coliseum. It's like if instead of playing as Ash in Pokemon Yellow, he was replaced with youngster Joey and their top percentage Rattata. Actually, now that I think about it, that might make the game easier. That Rattata is in the top percentage after all. The Battle City story had to have some pretty severe rewrites to include this new protagonist, and therefore a bunch of things got shuffled around or removed to make a severely streamlined and stunningly watered down version of events. For example, the last duel before all of the Battle City finalists were decided in the manga and anime is between Bakura and Bones, yet it's quite literally one of the first duels that you can take part in once their tournament gets going, and is the first time that you could battle for a locator card in the entire game. The tag duel that takes place on top of the building between Team Yugi and Kaiba and Team Loomis and Umbra swaps out Kaiba with our character, completely gutting the duel of any real drama since our character is meant to be indomitable and unbeatable. I think I might be getting a bit ahead of myself here, so let's go over the basics first. The format of the Sacred Cards is very similar to that of Dark Duel Stories, minus the very interesting fusion mechanics that made Dark Duel Stories so memorable, but with the addition of dedicated spell and trap zones to be more in line with the real-world trading card game. Won't exactly go into as much detail as I did in my previous video, go check it out if you haven't yet, but I can still give you a quick lowdown. The Duel Monsters series of games have their own strange format, bred from the confusion and vagueness of having to interpret manga chapters into a playable trading card game. The main differences between the physical TCG and Duel Monsters format are the lack of any sort of player phases, the absurd amount of cards that do not function as their real-world counterparts do, or have had their effects completely removed, the elemental system, and the deck size duelist level card cost system. Let's start with the first one that I listed there. When playing the actual Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game and it being your turn, you are able to take certain actions depending on what phase of your turn that you are in. These phases are known as the draw phase, standby phase, main phase 1, battle phase, main phase 2, and end phase. None of these are present in the Sacred Cards. You simply begin your turn and can take any and all actions that you choose in basically any order. While this might not seem like it's all that different, there are some shenanigans that you can get up to that simply are not possible in the real card game. For example, during my playthrough of the Sacred Cards to get the footage for this video, I would sometimes find myself in a position where I have one or more monsters to tribute for a bigger dude, alongside a dark hole in my hand and some opposing monsters on my opponent's field. I am able to sacrifice my monsters, yet before I summon my tribute monster, I can play the dark hole and destroy every monster on the field. Then, place my bigger guy down on the field and attack directly for some life point damage. Additionally, sometimes I would destroy an opponent's monster through battle or card effect, but be unable to close out the game without another body on the field. With Monster Reborn in my grip, I can bring back one of my opponent's monsters that was destroyed last, and then attack for game with them without having to wait a turn, since Monster Reborn isn't a quick play spell card. The words I just spewed from my mouth might sound like complete random nonsense to the uninitiated, but anyone who has pertinent knowledge of how Yu-Gi-Oh! Is actually played probably have their jaws on the floor. Or maybe they just grinned a little and said, "That's crazy." Because that's probably what actually happened. Yu-Gi-Oh's really not that interesting. In regards to monsters' effects being changed or completely gutted from their real-world counterparts, this stands as a remnant of the game's developers taking a somewhat lazy route when importing data from previous Duel Monsters games. Back when there was no physical TCG, the Duel Monsters games simply made every single monster that they added to the game effectless vanilla monsters. As more Duel Monsters games were released, some cards did end up receiving some sort of effect that was relevant to how they functioned in the real world, but many would end up still remaining static and effectless, while other actually real-world effectless monsters were given easy-to-program effects based off of their flavor text. Effect monsters can only use their effects the turn that they are summoned, which is a bit odd and makes it to where every monster is treated like a pseudo-flip effect monster that you, flip yourself or something. There's this weird mechanic with a hidden static. I don't, nope, no. Also, fusion monsters just straight up do not exist at all, with the dominant monster mashing summoning method being ritual monsters, which function wildly different from how they do IRL. Instead of requiring the ritual monster itself, you instead need the ritual spell card in your hand and one specific monster card listed on said ritual spell, then two not specific ritual sacrifice monsters. With all three cards on the field, you can sacrifice your two non-specific monsters and then transform the third specific card into the ritual monster. The ritual monster does not need to actually reside in your deck in this regard, since the game itself creates the monster for you when a ritual takes place. But you can also just raw dog the ritual monster the old-fashioned way once you obtain it as an actual card drop or card purchase. The Duel Monsters series has also had an elemental affinity system with varying degrees of relevancy over the years. The Sacred Cards adopts the exact same system that Dark Duel Stories does, and I'll give you a brief rundown. Every monster has one elemental type that is weak to or strong against one other type. And if that monster battles an opponent's monster while they have an effective typing against them, then that monster is destroyed no matter what the difference is between the stats of either monster. This matchup chart is as follows. Pyro beats Forest, Forest beats Wind, Wind beats Earth, Earth beats Thunder, Thunder beats Aqua, and Aqua beats Pyro. There's also Shadow that beats Light, Light that beats Fiends, Fiend beats Dreams, and Dreams beats Shadow. The only monster typing free of any weakness or strengths is the Divine type, which has been spelled correctly, and that makes me so happy. The Divine type is usually reserved for ritual monsters or the God cards, which are actually playable in this game. Well, I mean, like 2 of them are at least. And of course, the deck size, duelist level, card cost system is where the meta progression of the game comes in. Your deck will initially be filled with a bunch of very weak monsters. The strongest non-tribute attackers in your arsenal will be a few 900 bodies. But unlike Dark Duel stories or Forbidden Memories, you actually have a fair few high attack tribute summons, so you don't get bodied by a single bean soldier. Every single card in the game has a cost that represents its perceived value, and that number takes up space in your deck size. If you don't have the appropriate deck size, then you need to make space by removing other cards or win a few duels to increase it. Your duelist level is also associated with a card's card cost, in that you cannot play a card whose cost is above your current duelist level. Your starting duelist level is 72, and your deck capacity starts at 1600. Both numbers are pretty generous, since your starter deck in this game costs a total of 1,229, which leaves quite a bit of breathing room for you to add new cards that you get from early duels. Your deck size and duelist level are increased as you win duels, which means you can always target the weakest person in your periphery to farm for clout and card drops. I'm looking at you, Tristan. It's a whole headache to list everything in a video specifically meant to talk about a particular game, so I won't go into any more detail than that. So this is normally where I would mention how the game hits you hard in the difficulty department, given Yu-Gi-Oh's propensity for that sort of thing in the past. Apologies for anyone that's a fan of overdramatic reactions, but this game is straight up beyond easy. Genuinely, I do not think that you need to grind at all to make a deck that can beat the final boss without breaking a sweat, and it's for 2 very specific reasons. The first is the overall low power level of every single duelist in the game. If you watched the anime or read the manga, then I'm sure you're probably familiar with a fair few duelists of some renown that have pretty explicitly shown cards that you'd expect them to use when you duel them in the sacred cards. Prepare to be pretty woefully underwhelmed, because despite most duelists still using 1 or 2 cards associated with them, their decks are so blatantly unusable, it's almost demeaning. Bones is a great example of this, as the only monster that they have that can beat any of your 900 attack bodies is a single copy of Pumpkin the King of Ghosts, which is a tribute monster. You might be thinking to yourself, well, actually Bones is the first duelist that you can win a locator card off of. Of course he'd be easy. Well then let's look at Esperoba, the second locator card battle you can take part in. Once again, there's not a single monster that they can normal summon that beats any of your 900 bodies besides Doron, which suffers from a Thunder type weakness given its Aqua typing. There's their 1 copy of Jinzo, of course, but that's a tribute monster, and you can simply walk over every monster that they end up summoning to prevent them from getting any tribute fodder on the field. Okay, then what about friggin' Rex Raptor? There's a ton of above average dinosaur monsters that they could summon. Wrong. The strongest non-tribute dinosaur that they have in their deck is literally freaking Tomasaurus, a 500 attack monster that you will literally not even look twice at before curb stomping into next week. To the game's credit, it does attempt to ambush the player with many duels where the opponent is at an advantage with a certain field spell already active whenever the duel begins, which feels more like a band-aid patch over a gaping hole for the game's difficulty spikes than an actual challenging curveball. This is very apparent the more that you duel the overarching villains of the game, the ghouls, or more officially known in the English translation as the Rare Hunters. The ghouls all start with the Yummy Field spell active, meaning that all spellcaster and fiend type monsters get a 30% boost to their attack and defense points. They're also the only duelists that you'll actually have trouble with unless you buff up your deck a little bit. It's also worth noting that every single rare hunter uses the exact same deck except for the specifically named ones. Actually, every single unnamed duelist in the entire game uses the same deck as each other, only being differentiated by the area that they're in. The Yugipedia wiki literally just calls them generic duelists, since, I mean, yeah, I guess that's technically what they are. Imagine waking up and you're literally just generic duelist number 1. That's gotta suck. If you were expecting to go up against a bunch of varied decks and duelists with different strategies, then you're probably gonna want to play a more focused Yu-Gi-Oh game. The second reason that the Sacred Card is so easy is that the ability to enter passwords as well as directly purchase cards from an in-game shop is available as soon as Kaiba says go on the Battle City tournament. The way that passwords work in the Sacred Cards is a little different from games like the Eternal Duelist Soul and Dark Duel stories, since instead of entering a card password and directly receiving it into your collection, you instead add it to the list of cards available for purchase from the card vendor. What cards are currently in stock is dependent on random chance, as around 50 are added every time that a duel is won. You can purchase cards with a currency known as Domino, which is basically just Yu-Gi-Oh's version of V-Bucks. My roommate probably really enjoyed that sentence. Most of the time, you simply accrue Domino as you win duels, but you can also simply sell cards that you don't need or enter the code 626-26514 for a whopping 50 grand to spend on bettering your deck. Also, you can enter the code 980-252-29 for a fat 100 deck capacity to make room for like one good card, if that. That's one thing that you'll probably notice immediately when you happen to get a decent card. The cost for a staggering amount of cards has been drastically increased since the Dark Duel Stories days. In between Duel Monsters 3 Tri-Holy God Advent and Duel Monsters 7 The Duel City Legend was one other group of games that used the same card list and general gameplay elements as them, those being Duel Monsters 4 Battle of Great Duelists, Yugi deck, Joey deck, and Kaiba deck. I'm making a comparison here, just give me a second. Let's take a look at the card Komori Dragon to see just how obnoxious these card cost limitations are. In Dark Duel Stories, Komori Dragon has a card cost of 27 to put in your deck. This is, of course, assuming that you obtained it via password or duelist card drop beforehand. In Battle of Great Duelists, Komori Dragon was actually nerfed, being turned into a tribute monster and thus costing less to put in your deck as a result, now costing a measly 7 points of deck space. In the Sacred Cards, Komori Dragon is a baffling 183 points. This one card will cost you over 11% of your starting deck space alone. I am assuming that this is in an effort to drag out the middling content that the Sacred Card has to offer. It's a little depressing to know that the developers of this game couldn't be asked to program in very many unique duelists, but they could be asked to change the cost of every single decently stated monster in the game to be so out of reach it's almost comical. And there's no card creation in this game, unlike Dark Duel Stories. Really puts into perspective their intentions when they were putting this whole project together. Not that they're evil or anything, it's literally a freaking video game, who gives a shit? Now, here's the fun part of the video where I get to explain how to completely wreck this game's world, which cards to pick, and where your opponents can shove it. The general low power level of every single duelist in the game means that keeping momentum is far more important than high attack normal summons. Cards that special summon other cards are king, and you already start with a copy of one of them in your deck, Duron. Duron lets you spend a turn special summoning another Duron onto the field for tribute fodder next turn. His low deck cost of 72 more than matches his worth as a play enabler. Toadmaster also fulfills this role with a similar deck cost of 87, special summoning a frog to jam beside them in exchange for their action for for the turn. I would also recommend Spirit of the Books since they special summon a Buku, but by the time that you're able to fit them into your deck, you're probably including more substantial normal summons anyway. A sleeper include is actually Petite Moth, which, despite not appearing as an effect monster, will actually grow up from its little self to the Larva Moth, then to the Cocoon of Evolution, then to the Great Moth, and then finally the perfectly ultimate Great Moth monster as turns roll by. It's a little hard to make the Petite Moth stick without some backup, so consider paralysis monsters like Electric Lizard or attack blocking trap cards like Infinite Dismissal. Raigeki, Dark Hole, Crush Card, Beckon to Darkness, and Final Destiny are your go-to monster removal. Though I'd recommend being wary of Final Destiny since it destroys everything on the field and also in both players' hands. Don't use it unless you're like truly desperate. These cards are genuinely so deck cost cheap, it's fascinating given how much I harped on their exclusivity in my Dark Duel Stories video. Raigeki and Dark Hole are limited in the sacred cards, meaning that you can only use one copy, but the other cards give you the freedom to load up on a maximum of 3 to send your opponent's soul straight to a McDonald's play place. Any and all high-statted tribute monsters are fair game, so you can basically pick whichever ones are your favorites. Just know that things like the Blue Eyes White Dragon aren't exactly the best choice given the amount of shadow monsters that the main antagonists play. I personally recommend ignoring the broader side of the attribute weakness chart since the majority of actually difficult battles you'll be taking part in will almost exclusively be against the ghouls and their ilk. So that basically leaves your big tribute monster to want to be shadow type, preferably either fiends or spellcasters. A great couple of single tribute monsters include Dark Magician Girl, Toon Dark Magician Girl, and Warrior of Tradition to get those yummy feel boosts. So to combat the inevitable influx of your opponent's shadow and fiend type monsters, you're going to want to include a few light and dreams types dudes to keep your field from being run over. I like to not bother with my counter cards having stats, since the majority of the time I just expect them to pick a type advantage fight and win that, and that's about it. So for Dreams monsters, you can go with Dark Eyes Illusionist and Thousand Eyes Idol. Light monsters have fewer zero static cards, so things like the Unhappy Maiden, E-Mace, and Magician of Faith are perfectly viable includes, though you could opt into a couple copies of Skellingel for the card draw effect to keep up the pace of the duel in your favor. And now the piece of resistance. Is that how you say that? The trap card lineup. Unlike in Dark Duel Stories, you actually have more than enough room to clog up your deck with reactionary traps, and there's a staggering many of them that are not only powerful includes, but also delightfully cheap. Invisible Wire, Acid Trap Hole, Widespread Ruin, and Torrential Tribute all function as either Sakuretsu Armors or Mirror Forces. You heard that right. Torrential Tribute is a Mirror Force in this game. Actually, it's even better since it destroys all monsters on your opponent's field instead of just the attack position ones. And get this, you can include 3 copies of them for roughly the same space that it would take to add a Rock Ogre Grotto number 2. That is beyond insane. That's stocks. You can also include the Trap Master monster in your deck, which has the special ability to create a set acid trap hole for the low cost of your normal summon and monster action for the turn. Even a single copy of these cards make for an incredible deck that will carry you without much need for good RNG. It's worth mentioning that you can input any card's password in as many times as you'd like, since you are required to purchase them before they are added to your trunk. This means any and all cards are on the table the moment that you have the funds to buy them from the store. And I mean, that's pretty much it, honestly, for the general gist of the sacred cards. I could go into depth about every single different story set piece that got changed between the original Battle City arc of the manga and anime versus this game, but I feel like that would be more effort than it's actually worth. Genuinely, I have put more time into writing this script than I actually did playing the entire game. Last year, I did a playthrough because I was going to review it then, but I ended up running into creative of burnout, so I didn't end up using the footage. When the early days collection came out, I was reinvigorated to cover the game again, and comparing both playthroughs' playtimes is honestly pretty funny. Last year, it took me 4.5 hours to completely beat the game, and this year it took 3 hours and 45 minutes, and that was with bathroom breaks, chatting with friends, and relearning the controls, and generally meandering throughout the story. So I wanted to use this opportunity to ask a very important question. Why is this particular Yu-Gi-Oh game so easy? And I think I landed on an answer that could end up satisfying both myself and others that were curious. It's the setting. What do I mean by that? Well, unlike Dark Duel stories, the Eternal Duelist Soul, and even freaking Dungeon Dice monsters, the setting itself is not built for you to lose. Think about it. The Battle City tournament is built around the locator card ante system, meaning that duelists are only prepared to duel with tournament stakes on the line, and losing that duel would mean you are down one of your 6 locator cards and would have to reduel certain people to get it back. If you notice during gameplay, losing to anyone actually sends you all the way back to your home as if you just started up the game, basically resetting time. You'll still lose any anteed cards that you put up for grabs, but the story itself refuses to allow you to canonically lose. You also have to be a pretty good duelist in your own right to not only participate in the Battle City tournament, but end up taking the whole contest in this game's canon, meaning you have to be able to beat duelists like Weevil Underwood, Rex Raptor, Esperoba, Bones, Bandit Keith, Yukimoto, Seto Kaiba, and Joey Wheeler without too much fuss. Yeah, sure, there is meta progression as you unlock cards and beef up your deck, but to be able to include monster swings in deck power would require beyond agonizing levels of grind. A grind that is not canonically possible given the game's setting. A few people have actually taken a crack at figuring out how long the Battle City tournament actually took, and most people seem to agree it's roughly 1 day to a couple of days. Bakura even mentions in-game that due to him sleeping in, he almost missed his chance to qualify for the tournament's finals. I'm pretty sure that every duelist present in Battle City did not have the time or energy to spend dueling this one guy over and over so that he could get a good enough deck to mollywop every other duelist in their way. There is just genuinely not enough time in your standard meta progression to take place during such an event. There is actually a game called Yu-Gi-Oh! Worldwide Edition, Stairway to the Destined Duel, that attempts to reformat the Battle City tournament into a more long-form event, which gives credence to just how destined for failure Yu-Gi-Oh! The Sacred Cards was from inception. So, yeah, that's why this game is the way that it is. It's just an unfortunate stepping stone for the Duel Monsters series of games to have had to take in order to learn how to make a good Yu-Gi-Oh game that includes source material. This game doesn't even have multiplayer, man. Dark Duel Stories has multiplayer, and that shit came out on the Game Boy Color. Alright, so what will follow now is some trivia that I learned while researching for this video. Next Yu-Gi-Oh game is going to be Rechef of Destruction, a game I've never played, but my older brother did once. I've heard it's the complete opposite of the Sacred Cards. So I'm excited. If you have any tidbits that you'd like to share or would like to correct me on some of the info that I shared in this video, feel free to do so in the comments below. I'll leave a pinned comment with updated information should any arise. Y'all are the best! Alright, every card in the Sacred Cards was directly imported from Duel Monsters 4 Battle of Great Duelists, though with some caveats. Weather Report, Binding Chain, Mechanical Snail, Green Kappa, and Mon Larvis were replaced with these Spirit Message cards, all of which are trap cards in this game despite that not being the case in the real trading card game. Uwashi, Satellite Cannon, Mutant Crab, Insect Larva, Slime, Ogre Head Zombie, Burning Phoenix, Emperor of Flames, Soul Scissors, Owl Hermit of the Black Forest, Sonic Jammer, Southern Ocean Diabolos, Rough Missile Launcher, Dragon Pirate Soldier, Captain Leo, Spectre, Spirit of the Gems Hassan, Robo Lady, Robo Yaro, Legend Nymph, Boomerang Boy, Beauty Lip, Mechanical Ninja Raiko, Lightning Wallaby, Iron Face, Umbrella Chimera, Soul-Licer Crystal, Red Mane Blutches, Long-Nose Mammoth, Angler Fatfish, Light Lob Medium, and Rootwood were all replaced with Beast of Gilfer, The Portrait's Secret, The Gross Ghost of Fled Dreams, Headless Knight, Dark Necrofear, The Earl of Demise, Dumbire of the Dark, Earthbound Spirit, Embodiment of Apophis, Ancient Lamp, Amazon Chainmaster, Thunder Nyan Nyan, Injection Fairy Lily, Alternate Artwork Dark Magician, Alternate Artwork Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, Executor Mercuriora, Visor Des, Amazon Swordswoman, Amazon Archers, Des Voltsgaff, Toon Dark Magician Girl, Guilford the Lightning, Mystical Beast Circuit, Cyber Harpy, Exarion Universe, Legendary Fiend, Alternate Artwork Red Eyes Black Metal Dragon, Alternate Artwork Red Eyes Black Dragon, Dark Sage, Five-Headed Dragon, known as FGD in-game, and Master of Dragon Soldier. All of these cards were used in the Battle City or Virtual World arcs in some form or another, so it makes sense why they were included. But what did my boy Green Kappa do to get disrespected like that? Free my brother! Genuinely, it is kind of weird. I think that they ran out of space in the cartridge for adding new cards, so they literally just had to get rid of. First and foremost, none of these cards are real. These are not real cards. Shut up. A few cards besides the ones I just listed also feature alternate artworks, though they specifically only feature them instead of their original artwork. These cards are Gaia the Fierce Knight, Celtic Guardian, Tiger Axe, Thousand Dragon, Pendulum Machine, and Launcher Spider. There might be more, but I got bored looking for them. Despite most cards in the game being centered like they are in the United States, such as Water Amatics and the Spirit Message cards, some cards actually use their uncensored artwork, like Axe of Despair, Cyber Shield, Soul of the Pure, Dying Kettle the Cure Master, Goddess of Whim, and Succubus Knight. And that's about everything that I've got. Sorry for it seems like it's a really short video, but I'm looking at my audio and it's like 40 minutes long. I wouldn't say that's a short video. I feel pretty good about that. Do me a quick favor and consider sticking around in my community by subscribing to the channel. I've also got a community Discord where you can talk about what you're interested in seeing or providing feedback on the channel or myself. Also, I'd appreciate a like on the video since it helps boost its visibility in the algorithm. Oh, that algorithm. Why I oughta. Consider supporting me on Patreon or by becoming a channel member to help me get this channel to full-time status, baby. I want to get up there. I want to do YouTube full-time. Help me out. I'll chat with you guys next time I see you. Have a swell day, and I'll see you next time. Love you guys.